And guess what? We've got another soon-to-be typhoon. This is Noul, and you can really pick it out here on the map. Sticks out like a sore thumb. Pretty well to the east of the Philippines at this point, but it is going to move toward the west, and as it does so, it is going to strengthen.
But the damage, as you can see there, already done. This is what a foot of rain can do in just 3 short hours. Floodwaters swept 5 people to their deaths when their vehicles got trapped.
When the protests moved to Rabin Square in central Tel Aviv, clashes erupted. Protesters smashed shop windows and damaged police cars. Police fired tear gas and used water cannons to disperse the crowd, as what was a peaceful afternoon became a violent night.
Is the story that has everyone talking tonight, and our team is in place to cover it. Chief Meteorologist Bill Steffen has been breaking news on woodtv.com since the quake happened, and Tom Hillen is in Galesburg at the very place where the quake originated, just miles away from the epicenter. It is the largest quake to ever hit in West Michigan in decades. The epicenter is in Kalamazoo County. That's about 5 miles south of Galesburg. The U.S. Geological Survey measured it as a magnitude 4.2. As you can see here, we've got the epicenter marked. It's not far from Kalamazoo, and it really is one of the largest to ever hit. Dozens of you called our newsroom to tell us about your experiences. Many of you described it as the sound of a large truck rumbling by. Some of you actually caught it on video, and here's a listen at what it sounded like. And we got that video there from a fitness center in Kalamazoo. It shows the computer shaking. The employee there, you see, gets kind of concerned about what's going on. The surprising thing about all this is just how many people, despite it being here in West Michigan, identified it as an earthquake right away. Let's get out live to the epicenter of the quake right now. Not far from it is 24-hour News 8's Tom Hillen. He is near Galesburg with a look at what emergency officials are asking folks to be on the lookout for. Tom, good evening.
Well, good evening to you, Leon. The good news out of all of this, no reported injuries and only minor structural damage like you can see here at Checkered Pass Cycles. These cracks running along this wall here. I spoke with the owner. He says these were not here before today.
Everything on the shelves and windows, everything was shaking. But it lasted and just kept going. It probably lasted 10 to 15 seconds.
It struck just before 12:30 this afternoon, a 4.2 magnitude quake that was felt throughout West Michigan.
You look outside and there's not a cloud in the sky, there's no wind, it's a beautiful day, and all of a sudden everything's shaking.
Every time there's an earthquake, the U.S. Geological Survey sends out the coordinates of the epicenter of the quake. We tracked it to this empty cornfield just outside of Galesburg. Right here is the epicenter of today's quake. After the quake, the city went out to inspect buildings, roads, and bridges. The chief says they found minor damage to some buildings, but nothing people need to be worried about.
What we're really worried about is asking folks to pay attention for the next several days. If they smell the odor of gas or they see water bubbling up out of the ground or something that's quite unusual, please call 911 right away.
Many today described more than the shaking. It was the noise, which sounded like a freight train, many said, that left them a little unsettled.
You don't expect those in Michigan, you know, tornadoes, blizzards, not earthquakes.
Definitely what everyone is talking about here in Galesburg. Now, while these are not common in Michigan, it's not unheard of to have an earthquake here. The largest earthquake ever to hit Michigan was back in 1947, not far from where today's hit, and that was measured at a 4.6 back then. Well, coming up tonight at 10 and 11, I spoke to a woman here in Galesburg who was also here when that quake hit back in 1947. You'll hear her unique perspective tonight at 10 and 11. Live in Galesburg, Tom Hillen, 24-hour News 8.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Now, the moment the earthquake hit, Meteorologist Bill Steffen took to the woodtv.com and Bill's blog to let us all know exactly what was going on. In fact, a lot of the reports,
felt it.
right?
What is that, you know?
And a lot of the reports that we were getting actually came in through your blog.
Oh, it's got 700, 800 comments. And if you felt it and you want to leave a comment at Bill's blog, feel free to do that. A lot of people have. This is the strongest earthquake, Tom mentioned, since 1947 that's been centered here in southern Michigan. And that's before I was born, so that was a long time ago. Now, some of you remember an earthquake, a smaller one we had, 3.4 magnitude. That was back September 2nd, 1994. That one was centered just northwest of Lansing, though it was felt in Grand Rapids. Now, while we have a very rare occasion felt an earthquake centered in another state, the largest earthquake ever centered here in Michigan was on August 9th, 1947, and that had a magnitude of 4.6, a little bit bigger than this one. That quake was centered very close to where today's quake was centered. Now we may very well have a few aftershocks. If you have a 4.2 earthquake, the biggest aftershock that you get in our area here is would probably be too small to notice, so it really wouldn't amount to very much. Another question that people have been asking me is about fracking or hydraulic fracturing, if that had anything to do with this. We've checked the DEQ maps on that, and of course a lot of people concerned about that because down in Oklahoma they have linked some earthquakes to the fracking process. But there are no wells, as the map shows right here, that have been fracked in Kalamazoo or Calhoun. There's really no active drilling going on there at all. The nearest active drilling is in Hillsdale County, and there's a capped well up in Ionia County, and that's it. So fracking not an issue here. This earthquake was felt in 5 states and Canada, as far east as Cleveland, as far west as northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin. Fortunately, no injuries and just a few things knocked off of walls and store shelves. It's interesting watching the tweets on the earthquake today. Galesburg has become tweet famous. Pretty amazing. Leon, an interesting day here in West Michigan.
Yeah, no doubt, Bill. Now, what is the likelihood, if you can estimate, that we actually do have a significant earthquake where we would actually see damage or injuries? Is that possible with our setup here?
One of the things that we have to watch is some very major earthquakes occurred back around 1811, 1812 in southeast Missouri. Those earthquakes are strong enough to change the course of the Mississippi River and to ring bells in Boston that far away. They were certainly felt here. Those earthquakes would be a little bit more significant than what we felt today. So if we ever get an earthquake down in that area, that would be something that we'd have to watch out for here.
Storm should move off Australia's southeastern coast today, but the damage, as you can see there, already done. This is what a foot of rain can do in just 3 short hours. Floodwaters swept 5 people to their deaths when their vehicles got trapped. Strong surf also pulled a boy into the ocean, bringing the total number of deaths, unfortunately, to 6. Police say the drivers of the SUVs apparently thought they could navigate those floodwaters, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the force of that rushing water.
The USGS reports a total of 7 earthquakes. 6 were centered just south of Concord on the little-known Concord Fault, which slices under central Concord. The earthquakes ranged in magnitude from 4.0 to 1.6. A 1.9 magnitude quake was reported in Hayward. People tweeted that they felt the quakes from San Francisco to Walnut Creek and Oakley. ABC 7 News reporter Lillian Kim is live now in Concord. Lillian.
Katie, we found no damage at stores here along Willow Pass Road in Concord. Items remained on the shelves, and while not everyone felt it, we did find quite a few people who did.
It was just like it was a big shake. That was pretty much it. And I was asleep, so it woke me up.
Did you feel the earthquake?
Yeah, because we were walking down, and I says, hold on. I said, did you feel something? But it was like nothing hardly.
Like a rumble, that's all.
Anything fall in your house?
No. It just moved our apartment. That was about it.
So no cleanup after today's series of temblors, the largest being a 4.0. Stores are operating business as usual. Now we have some information on the Concord Green Valley fault system, which is where today's activity occurred. The USGS says the best estimate is that the last large earthquake on this fault was 200 to 500 years ago, and that there's only a 4% probability that the fault system would produce at least a 6.7 quake in the next 30 years. Live in Concord, Lillian Kim, ABC 7 News.
I'm standing here literally on the highway, one of the main highways leading from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. What should be rush hour has been shut down by these protesters behind me. Ethiopians with Israeli IDs, they're Ethiopian Israelis who are saying no more violence, no more to police brutality. They want equal rights, they want an equal voice. This protest was sparked by a video that came out about a week ago of police brutalizing an Ethiopian soldier. That caused a protest in Jerusalem and further protests here. People here say they're not going away until their voices are heard.
Nothing changed. Nothing changed. You promise and promise and promise. It doesn't do anything. For 30 years, he says something. It doesn't do anything.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's forming a commission to hear the voices of the representatives of this community. But the people here say things have gone too far. They're not interested in talking right now. Stephanie Fried, CCTV, Tel Aviv.
You know, out in the Pacific, things are just about always active, especially in the Western Pacific as far as hurricane activity, typhoon activity. And guess what? We've got another soon-to-be typhoon. This is Noul, and you can really pick it out here on the map. Sticks out like a sore thumb. Pretty well to the east of the Philippines at this point, but it is going to move toward the west, and as it does so, it is going to strengthen quite a bit. Now, the cone of uncertainty is still pretty wide as far as the storm goes. That's going to be the big question. Will it make landfall? By the time we get to the weekend, it's certainly going to be a strong storm. It'll be close to the Philippines, but how close does it get? Still yet to be determined. We'll watch it closely and we'll keep you updated.
New and scathing report accuses the Israeli military of showing little regard for the safety of Palestinian civilians during the war with Gaza last year. This is a report called "This is How We Fought in Gaza," and it comes from an Israeli non-governmental group, an NGO.
And it's based on anonymous testimonies from dozens of Israeli soldiers and officers who apparently reveal all sorts of inappropriate behavior in the field. Oren Lieberman is in Jerusalem with what the report exactly entails and the Israeli military's response.
A shocking report coming out of Israel tonight about Operation Protective Edge, more commonly known as the Gaza War, a 50-day war last summer that left large parts of Gaza in ruins. It was a battle, a war between the Israeli military and Hamas. The report comes from Breaking the Silence, a left-wing NGO that is no stranger to controversy. The report is called "This is How We Fought in Gaza." Report organizers interviewed 60 soldiers who fought in Gaza anonymously, some of them soldiers or some of them officers, and collected their accounts, collected their testimonials of what it was like on the ground. And the allegations are certainly disturbing. Let me read you a few short parts of what the report alleges happened on the ground. The report alleges there was indiscriminate fire against civilians and, quote, a massive and unprecedented harm to the population and the civilian infrastructure in Gaza. The report goes on. It's a 240-page report that goes into detail in many of these allegations, including commanders who called for, quote, brutal and unethical conduct. As you can imagine, it is an incredibly controversial report, and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, essentially the Israeli military, issued their own response. The IDF says they've looked into allegations, they've welcomed any allegations of misconduct on the part of officers or on the part of soldiers, and they've conducted these investigations, and if they felt they got to that level, they went to the Military Advocate General. So let me read you a short part of the response here. It says, quote, "Today, as in the past, the organization Breaking the Silence has been asked to provide any evidence or testimony related to IDF activities prior to publication in order for genuine investigations to be carried out. Unfortunately, as in the past, Breaking the Silence has refused to provide the IDF with any proof of their claims." So a very stinging report, a very poignant report coming out tonight, very serious allegations in this report, the IDF responding. Certainly a lot of controversy surrounding the report, but a very detailed report that's worth looking into, and we'll hear a lot more about it, I suspect, in the coming days. Oren Lieberman, CNN, Jerusalem.
And CNN political commentator Peter Beinart comes to us now from CNN New York. He is a contributing editor at Atlantic Media and a senior fellow at the New America Foundation. Peter, great to see you. Obviously, very disturbing allegations in this 240-plus page report. I want to first get your take on what we're hearing about it.
Well, it's not surprising the Israeli military would respond the way they do. This Israeli military is a kind of revered institution in Israel, and to criticize it as Breaking the Silence has done is very, very controversial. So I'm not surprised at all they would respond this way. I happen to know some of the leaders of Breaking the Silence. I think they're a very brave group of former Israeli and current Israeli army officers who, in my experience, are actually very patriotic Israelis who are disturbed by some of what's been happening in in recent years in the war in Gaza and in Israel's behavior in the West Bank. And I think if Israel wants to say that it's a democracy, as it is, and it wants to say that it's proud of its independent democratic institutions, and I think to some degree as it should be, then I think the right response is to actually have a real mechanism for investigating these claims. And
you know, that's important to say that too. They are former, you know, they're vets. I mean, the people who run this. The allegations though are stunning. They're ironically the sorts of things Gazans were saying during the war, but this coming from Israeli soldiers. Things like targeting civilians without due cause. There was one soldier told about two women walking through an orchard who were taken out simply because they had cell phones. Houses being wantonly destroyed by bulldozers for no particular reason. Do you think, despite the IDF, does the IDF have a point when they say, you're making these allegations, how can we deal with them? You didn't bring them to us.
Well, I do think that they should that this information should be investigated by the IDF. I think the question would be, does Breaking the Silence have a responsibility to bring it to the IDF before they make it public? That, I think, would be the question to look at. You know, the main point, as I understand it, of this report is that the rules of engagement were changed, and so that freed soldiers to be more liberal in their use of fire, even against people who were likely to be non-combatants than they had before. I don't think anyone would suggest that this is an easy situation to be in for any soldier, nor do I, as an American, think that the United States military necessarily would do any better job than Israel did. It's an extremely difficult circumstance whenever you're a soldier fighting against people who are in amongst a civilian population, and indeed who are taking cover among that civilian population. But I do think that, again, if you're a democracy that holds yourself to a high standard, as Israel does, and Israel says that it's very important that the IDF holds itself to high ethical standards, then indeed you should welcome this kind of scrutiny because you want to have the most ethical military you possibly can.
Peter, you said that you spoke with some of the leaders from this NGO, Breaking the Silence. Is there any dialogue between the people in this group along with the IDF as this investigation is happening internally? Is there any room for collaboration?
I haven't talked, I don't know the answer specifically. Again, these are people who are former, current soldiers, and I think they are constantly in dialogue with a lot of people in the Israeli Defense Forces. I think they are generally pessimistic about the efficacy of internal Israeli investigations, but I think one of the purposes of this kind of effort is in fact to prompt those kind of investigations and to prompt a broader conversation about what happens in Israeli society. And I think this is something which is not dissimilar to things that have happened in the United States. You know, people go off to war and they come back having seen horrible things, even done horrible things, with a lot of secrets. And it's very important for a society, although it's very painful. This is what John Kerry did when he came back from Vietnam and testified before Congress about some of the things that he had seen U.S. soldiers done in Vietnam. It's what happened with Abu Ghraib, with American soldiers in Iraq. It is not at all unpatriotic. I think it is actually very patriotic to say, these are the things that we have seen. We want to hold our country, our government, our military to a higher standard.
And briefly, Peter, I mean, as you say, it's basically a whistleblower group. I mean, all these soldiers can come along and give testimony, and it's just put out there if they feel bad about things they've seen or have taken part in. But in your experience reporting on Israel, have they affected any change?
Well, I think that it's a difficult environment in Israel politically ever to criticize the IDF, and Israel is the politics in Israel have been, you know, fairly dominantly on the right in recent years. So it's not an easy thing, but I don't think you can judge the importance of this or the value of this simply by whether, you know, breaking the silence would win a public opinion poll. Often, especially during times of war, critics of a government's policy and critics of the military from inside can be often very, very unpopular. But that in some ways is precisely why it's so important for them to tell uncomfortable, difficult truth.
The short video from a security camera in Holon, a suburb of Tel Aviv, has swept Israel and sparked waves of angry protests against police. At the center of the video is Corporal Demas Fkade, the 21-year-old Ethiopian soldier you see in uniform. He says he was trying to reach his house just a block away when police stopped him from crossing the street. There's no sound on the tape, so it's not clear what either party said, but Fkade says he was asking for permission to cross when the police officer grabbed his bike. Fkade says he urged him not to use force, but by then, another officer joined. You can see Fkade pushed to the ground and held down. There's no way to explain the feeling. Only God and I know how I felt, he says. First of all, it's degrading because you're a soldier who is serving the country, you're giving all of yourself, and it's degrading. Moments later, Fkade gets to his feet, he's seen picking up a rock, he eventually puts it down, and the situation appears to quiet down. Israeli authorities say both officers have been dismissed. The incident is still under investigation. The video set off protests across Israel from the Ethiopian Jewish community. Nearly 1,000 demonstrators gathered in Jerusalem on Thursday night, followed by hundreds more on Sunday in Tel Aviv. Protesters blocked off major streets in Tel Aviv, snarling traffic during rush hour. Still, it remained peaceful. But when the protests moved to Rabin Square in central Tel Aviv, clashes erupted. Protesters smashed shop windows and damaged police cars. Police fired tear gas and used water cannons to disperse the crowd, as what was a peaceful afternoon became a violent night. Authorities and Ethiopian leaders urged restraint, but it was well past midnight when the final protesters left Rabin Square. I am for the demonstrations, but I'm against violence, Fkade says. Whether it's on policemen or civilians, nobody should get hurt. It's a pity. But I'm for the demonstrations. I'm completely for them. The protests were not just about the video, but about what Ethiopians see as years of discrimination at the hands of police and authorities. The video was the tipping point. Fkade and community leaders met with the Prime Minister to try to ease the unrest in the community and begin to address the bigger issue of what Ethiopians see as discrimination. He expressed interest in us, in the family and the community, Fkade says, and I hope, as Prime Minister, he will now do the right thing. The Prime Minister says he saw the pictures and was shocked by what he saw in the beating video. The Prime Minister says Israel can't let things like this happen again. All sides here hoping the protests are the catalyst for change.
The U.S. military in Nepal is also using helicopters to conduct reconnaissance trips in an effort to identify remote areas in need of relief. 4 tilt-rotor aircraft have also arrived in Nepal, but at the moment only the helicopters have conducted reconnaissance flights. A U.S. Embassy official said the tilt-rotor aircraft and a U.S. Air Force plane touched down in the capital, Kathmandu, on Sunday. They'll be delivering relief supplies and will also do assessments. A Nepalese official said the U.S. aircraft would also airlift victims out of remote areas which suffered some of the worst devastation.
There in New York and take you to Baltimore, and the irony of this is incredible. We're almost exactly 1 week away from when things really deteriorated at this very intersection. This is in Baltimore, and this is a live picture from the area close by there, that same scene of Pennsylvania and North Avenue, where there's been some sort of a scuffle or an altercation or some police intervention. What we do know is that a large phalanx now of police officers, Baltimore City police officers, some of them also wearing that body armor that we have come to see so many times, on the other side of the street there, continuing to hold back a smallish crowd that has gathered. But this is something that's going on. It's very hard for us. Our Brad Bell, by the way, is on the scene, and we're standing by to get confirmation from him, but as you might expect, details are hard to come by, and we'll continue to watch this situation for you very carefully. Perhaps a suspect with a gun, but again, this has not been confirmed, and that perhaps the suspect may have used some sort of non-lethal force on that suspect. Apparently there is a video of a person being put into an ambulance, and again, we are watching this with our own eyes to try and ascertain exactly what's going on. But if all this looks eerily familiar, it's because it is. These are the very street corners and the streets themselves that prove the flashpoint of that rioting exactly 1 week ago. We don't anticipate anything like that, but it's also hard, given what happened a week ago, to rule anything out. But in the meantime, as we've showed you now, there's a significant police presence there, in this case blocking off the street, and what is obviously a police investigation going on in front of one of those row houses with storefronts out in front. They're now directing, as you can see, traffic around this same corner, and that was one of the ironies of a week ago, that there was so much traffic down these streets even as things were going on. And there you can see some of the crowd that has started to gather on that street corner, and they're being obviously held back by police, who continue to sort of move them back, if you will, away from what is the scene of the investigation, which is on the other side of the street, in about the middle of the block. But the police are gently moving them back and trying to control the crowd and hopefully the passions of that crowd right there. Just standing by to hear from Brad Bell on just exactly what's going on. We're watching this as we say. And again, this is exactly where we were looking from exactly the same camera vantage point 1 week ago, when the bad stuff really started in Baltimore, the rock and bottle throwing and what became lawless behavior that we've come to find out has been so embarrassing to much of the Baltimore community. This is a place now that is profoundly unhappy about what happened a week ago and determined to not let it happen again. We'll watch what happens there right now, so keep it right here and we'll keep you up to the minute. We'll step away for just a bit. We're back with more news right after this.
Tense moments in Baltimore this afternoon after police arrest a man they say was armed in the same neighborhood rocked by riots 1 week ago. Complicating things, many witnesses heard a gunshot and thought police had shot the man. Maryland Bureau Chief Brad Bell arrived on the scene minutes after the arrest. He's here with what really happened and how the community is recovering from a week of tension. Brad?
Yeah, Maureen, this happened just down here on North Avenue, really the exact same spot from where police started chasing Freddie Gray on April 12th. That chase leading to the death of the young man, which touched off all of this tension. This afternoon, you're right, people thought that officers had shot a man. That was not the case, but it touched off a big, angry mob on a day everyone else was hoping things would get back to normal. Today is the day the National Guard is pulling out of Baltimore. The only soldier we see on the streets is taking pictures. A once looted mall is crowded with customers, albeit under the watchful eye of more than a dozen police. A burned-out drugstore is being evaluated by a corporate team. People are hoping for normalcy.
Yes, I think they should open because the people in the neighborhood need them.
But I'm also happy to see that things are getting back to normal around here.
And then it happens. Tensions flare anew.
The guy had a gun. Let them all know that. I want to talk to him.
Police apprehend a man with a gun. As the suspect drops his revolver, it fires. Nobody is hit, but a national cable network wrongly reports police shot the man. An angry crowd gathers until officers are able to lower the temperature.
Gentleman had a gun. The officers were approaching him to try to arrest him for having that gun. He tried to throw the gun away, and the gun went off. He was throwing his gun down, and the gun went off. No police officer shot anybody.
Now, this all happened about 2.5 hours ago, just where you see that group of people standing in front of that yellow and red awning at that grocery store. You can see things have returned to normal here. The police pulled out very quickly. Why are they so tense? Well, this is where all the rioting started, where that looting happened at that CVS store, which is just down the block. Police have pulled out. The crowd has dispersed. There is hope that peace will remain in effect here in Baltimore. In Baltimore, Brad Bell, ABC 7 News.
International humanitarian organizations have lashed out at Saudi Arabia for bombarding airports in Yemen. In a joint statement released on Monday, the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders expressed serious concerns about Saudi attacks on airports across the poorest Arab country. They described airports as essential civilian infrastructure and called for an end to Saudi air raids. They also said it's necessary to establish safe channels to send humanitarian supplies to the war-torn nation. Youssef Maudi, our correspondent, joins us now from the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. Youssef, tell us about the highly censured actions carried out by the Saudis, which include targeting the airports in Yemen and also blocking aid and medicine from reaching those in need in Yemen.
Yes, unfortunately, over the past month and a half of these Saudi airstrikes, at first the Yemeni people, their most concern was about the airstrikes, killing innocent civilians throughout the country. However, it's sad to say that now the people are more worried about going hungry and falling into this humanitarian crisis, and panic is most likely to ensue within the Yemeni people, within the Yemeni society. And the Yemeni people, they're not that much more worried about the airstrikes because unfortunately they're afraid of going hungry. There's no fuel, there's no gas, There is a 24-hour outage daily. The situation continues to grows worse by the day. There's barely any cars in the streets. There are barely any taxis, buses to transport people to work, to transport people to the areas which they have to go to. And this is something which is just getting worse by the day. And what's even worse is that Saudi Arabia continues to target Sana'a International Airport, which human rights organizations have stated is the main channel for necessary supplies to come into Yemen, to be imported to Yemen by human rights organizations and foreign nations who want to help alleviate the humanitarian and economic deterioration here in the country.
Yusuf, how do the people of Yemen feel in the face and the fact that the Saudis are carrying out these airstrikes without a UN mandate, and the international community has so far remained silent with regards to the atrocities that are being carried out there?
Well, they're outraged, and they are also raising a strong condemnation and against the UN Council. They believe that Saudi Arabia is getting away with mass murder. They believe Saudi Arabia is conducting these attacks and these airstrikes in coordination with the U.S., which has publicly mentioned that it has given logistical support to Saudi Arabia. They believe the UN Council is allowing Saudi Arabia to conduct its operations throughout the country, and this is why Saudi Arabia has been allowed to continue this. According to the Yemeni people, it's the UN has the final say-so, and they are fully capable of bringing an end to the Saudi airstrikes. They're fully capable of at least allowing humanitarian aid to come into Yemen by basically forcing Saudi Arabia to lift its blockade against Yemen's international airports and against the seaports, which have been blocked off indefinitely by Saudi Arabia and the coalition forces. So there's a great responsibility which the humanitarian or the UN Council has to take, and the Yemeni people have been taken to the streets over the past 3 weeks, and they're calling on the UN to take action against Saudi Arabia and to ultimately lift the siege.